content of this channel is for mature audiences. Parental discretion is advised. You're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. Please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification button. And please, feel free to share the video. Thank you.
Yo, what's cracking, man? I'm GG, man. You tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. It's the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up with no chasers, bruh. Real talk. Before I get things started, man, I want to say shout out to all the haters, man. Hope y'all having a good afternoon. It's not quite evening yet where I am. But what's good, man? Hope y'all having a good afternoon and a good evening wherever you are. If you can, man, please, hit the like button, subscribe button, and the bell notification button so you can stay on top of what's going on here on the Green Gorilla channel, okay? And last but not least, in terms of order of business, I want to give a shout out to all the members of the Green Gorilla channel who helped me to keep things going, man. So, big up to Brotherly Love 215, Michael Ross, Lee Ways, Black Swerve 404, An Honest Look at the End, John J, Afro National, Sherlyn Rowe, and Ricky Dawson. Big up to y'all, man. Big up to Stefan, Julius Ferguson, Lord Hamal, True 7360, Mr. Me Too, Call for President, I'm Just Jules, Broken Blade, Leading from the Back, J. Cleveland Green, and Gold Professor. Big up to y'all. Big up to 7th Coast Dojo, AKs and Curtains, H-Town, Roguish the Billmonger, BD Main, Adrian Thomas, Electrician 480, Binga, Cutting Up with the Jones, and Zanco 1. Big up. Big up to D. Scott, Path Guy 74, Pete Rock, Aaron Peters, Barnolis, Dardar, Vincent Lindsay, Michael Pierce, Beautiful Trauma, and Quiz the Poet. Big up to y'all, man. Big up to Black Wizard, ADOS, Jazz Tech, Shadow Observer, Sugar T, Artisan MC, Nasiana, Kyle J. Sura, Kareem, Troy Warren, and Mrs. KP Bailey. Big up. Big up to Alan Wiley, The Face, Mantis on Break, Life of Commerce, Dreamlit, A. Wilson's Ghost, Timothy Blewett, Jeffrey Speed, Marvin Battle Jr., and Mark Hope. Big up. Big up to Afro Troop TV, Adam, BGS Ibmore, Ignatz Mouse, Brian Peaks, Papa Didas, Scott Haywood, Black Uru, Dr. Tree 33, and Leroy Honeycutt. Big up to y'all. Big up to Supertech, 77 Base X, Brian McMurray, Karen S., Anthony Davis, Charles Rogers, Rick Ross, Sandra Jean, Charles Gilmore, and Patricia Colley. Big up. Big up to Greg, Barry Little, Mr. Valentino, Jason Hales, Black Men Being Brutally Honest, Cameron 87, Doc LaRock, Mark Swift, Odd Collard, and Donald Watts. Big up to y'all, man. Big up to Coach Hotep, Old Soul Chief, Mr. Blue Collar, TD Hip Hop Media, Drew Main, Mr. Heat, Sir Anthony, MLR, and Universal 178. Big up to y'all, man. Big up to Rasheed Barnes, Aaron Smith, DH, The Revelator, Aaron Infinite, Dr. Tiasan Johnson, Kalan Jakala, Hostile Adept, and WPR1. And I can't forget my brothers in heaven, Force Windu, David Carroll, and Kevin Samuels. Big up to y'all, man. On the Patreon side, I want to give a shout out to Prince D. Martini, Daxby, J Live, Rashawn Phillips Sorrells, Keith Bass, Nick, Rock One, Albert C., Dr. Ben Vincent, I Am the Light of My Father, Waffle Weave, William Joyner, Tyrone Hampton, Darnell Smith, Excalibur, Anu 219, Preserve Prisoner, Taz, Dragon 59, Jay Bailey, Mr. Michi, Momal, and the Sangwa. Big up to all y'all, man. Thank you. Of course, you deserve a round of applause. I know I get redundant with this. I know it's something that I do every time, but I'm going to continue to do it because I want to continue to express my appreciation. So, there you have it, man. And if you want to support the Green Gorilla channel on an ongoing basis, man, you can do so through a membership, man. Here's how you do it, and I'll be back. What's good, everybody? I'm the G with a PhD, and you're tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel, the place where black men can express themselves freely, straight up, no chaser. Today, I want to introduce you to my new membership program that consists of 5 levels where you can invest in the Green Gorilla channel on a monthly basis and receive level-specific perks. Memberships are special because they improve the quality of the content of the channel and will help me to be able to keep the channel going. Now, to participate in the Green Gorilla channel membership program, all you have to do is hit the join button, which is located right next to the subscribe button on my channel page. Now, for all of my subscribers who decide not to participate in my membership program, nothing will change. The content will keep coming the way it always has. Thanks for watching, and be careful out here, people. Bless. All right, man, we're back, man. I'm GG. You tuned in to the Green Gorilla channel. I really didn't plan on doing this today, but I figured, hey, I may as well just start getting down with this and get it out of the way. That way, I could be in the process of actually, kind of trying to cut through it, all right? So I said to you, I was going to start reading this book and explore, certain areas and domains of this text. And the name of the text is called Dark Ghettos, Injustice, Dissent, and Reform. See, a lot of people talk shit about the ghetto. They talk about ghetto people. I mean, we got words for it. We call motherfuckers in this space Pookies and Ray Rays, and, we call black women strags and all this kind of shit. And we talk about what's going on in the hood quite often, tangentially, but the conversation is rarely focused. It's almost always condemnatory. And even if there are solutions, the solutions, as far as I'm concerned, aren't really well thought out. They're not thought through in a meticulous fashion. So I said, let me read this book. And, it kind of piggybacks on a book that was written, and I think BGS has been doing a lot of exploration on this subject related to this author. His name is Kenneth Clark, and he wrote a book called The Dark Ghettos. But of course, this book is like, in my estimation, it's a new jack presentation of the same kind of information. It's a new contemporary evaluation of Kenneth Clark's work, his legacy, and what to do about the problem of the ghetto, man. Like, what should we do? Okay. Some people are ready to write the ghetto off and to cut its losses. And, they refer to, the people who live there as the community, or people who, are part of the community, or whatever the case may be. I mean, it's all, for the most part, condemnatory. But anyway, let's see what this guy has to say, man. The guy who wrote this book, his name is Tommy Shelby. I started making pre-recorded videos maybe a year and a half ago related to this subject, but nobody really actually watched the videos. Nobody actually watched the videos, because if you're not talking about some shit that's sensational to a lot of people, if you're not talking about these bitches ain't shit, a lot of you guys just don't tune in. It just is what it is. It's like you live, you live to talk shit about bitches or whatever the case may be. I don't get it, but I do get it to a certain extent, because if you're going through the grid with a chick, then you understand what that's about. But like, how can you stay there, mired in the same kind of sentimentality, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year? I just, I'm quite, I understand the sentiment, man, but I'm just saying, like, dude, like, it's like having a needle stuck in a groove. Like, what the fuck, like, what's the next move, man? What's the next step towards progress, or whatever the case may be? But at any rate, let me get right to this, man. I know that's gonna piss some guys off into space, just me even saying that. But yeah, let me go ahead and get to this shit, man. So again, this book is entitled Dark Ghettos, man. I'm gonna just go ahead and start the screen capture, and hopefully it'll do what it's supposed to do, and you can see what you're supposed to see here, man. Hopefully. If everything works the way it's supposed to work. You see that? Yeah, you see it. You see it. Anyway, yeah, the book is called Dark Ghettos, okay? And shout out to the author. His name is Tommy Shelby. The book is available in stores. I mean, if you want to go, purchase the text, fine. I'm just going to read it to you in various segments of the text. I really wish that I could get through the entirety of it, but I got to break it down into small chunks. I can't read entire chapters at a time. It's going to take too much time for me to do that. I just don't have the resolve to do it, okay? But anyway, so yeah, that's the name of his book. It's called Dark Ghettos, Injustice, Dissent, and Reform. It's a Harvard University Press book, so it's not some bullshit some Negro threw together that is not well thought out. And he, this guy, by the way, teaches at Harvard, okay? So, yeah. And, he's a smart guy, he is, okay? Anyway, so there's a series of epigraphs, which is like, introductory paragraphs that kind of give you some indication of where the text is going. He says the ghetto was a name for the Jewish quarter in 16th century Venice. Okay, so this is 16th century Venice. We're talking about the 1500s in Italy. Okay, later it came to mean any section of a city to which Jews were confined. America has contributed to the concept of the ghetto, the restriction of persons to a special area, and the limiting of their freedom of choice on the basis of color. The dark ghetto's invisible walls have been erected by the white society, by those who have power, both to confine those who have no power and to perpetuate their powerlessness. The dark ghettos are social, political, educational, and above all, economic colonies. Okay, so he likens, the condition of the people who live in ghettos to colonies. Okay, social, political, educational, and economic colonies. Okay, their inhabitants are subject peoples, victims of the greed, cruelty, insensitivity, guilt, and fear of their masters. So, of course, this is Kenneth Clark, and his words, which are being quoted from the book Dark Ghetto, Dilemmas of Social Power, which BGS has had, on occasion, some coverage of, okay? The next epigraph is, unjust social arrangements are themselves a kind of extortion, even violence, and consent to them does not bind, okay? So, you got Kenneth Clark, then you have, a philosopher. His name is John Rawls. He wrote a book called A Theory of Justice, and he's quoting here from that book, A Theory of Justice. I've done shows on John Rawls. Go back and look at, some of the videos I've done and put John Rawls in the search bar, and you'll see something pop up. I've covered John Rawls. Anyway, he also has a quote from a song from Lupe Fiasco. Now, I can't pledge allegiance to your flag because I can't find no reconciliation with your past. When there was nothing equal for my people in your math, you forced us in the ghetto and then you took our dads. So that's from Lupe Fiasco's song, Strange Fruition, okay? Now, let's break down the table of contents here. So you got the intro, which is what I'm going to read to you today. I'm going to read the intro. Rethinking the Problem of the Ghetto. Then you got part 1, liberty, equality, fraternity. Of course, those are words that, were used during the French Revolution. You should know that. If you don't know it, now you do. Part 1 consists of 3 chapters, injustice, community, and culture. Part 2 consists of 3 chapters, reproduction, family, and work. And it's dealing with the subject matter of love and labor. And part 3 is rejecting the claims of law, crime, punishment, impure descent. Okay. And then he has an epilogue, and it's entitled renewing ghetto abolitionism, okay? And then he's got notes, acknowledgments, and an index, and so on and so forth, but you get the picture, right? So what I'm gonna read to you today, and I might do one of these a week, okay? I'm not gonna spend an entire week, or maybe twice a week, I'll read to you sections or excerpts from this book, okay? The excerpts I'm gonna read for you now, I think it's maybe 10 pages or something like that, so I'm just gonna try to get through it, and you can make your determination. If something, kind of alarms me, or if I find something questionable, I'll say something about it. If you have any questions for me, you can leave it in the chat, but I'm not really looking at the chat at the current moment, but if you feel the need, if you have any, questions or you want something clarified, feel free after I get through reading to, chime in and ask the question, okay? So anyway, and I guarantee you, there's something in this book that's going to resonate with you, because we keep having these conversations over and over and over and over again about black people and the ghetto, and about Shaniqua and Shanae, and about ratchet strag bitches and all this kind of shit, and Pookies and Ray Ray niggas. We keep having this conversation, so to say it's not relevant, you're a goddamn lie. The question is whether or not are we going to actually circumscribe this kind of subject and make it manageable and tractable, or are we going to just keep, bursting forth with feelings and emotions and opinion that really doesn't take us anywhere, all right? So anyway, it starts off, it says, from New York City to Los Angeles, poor black neighborhoods blot the metropolitan landscapes of the U.S. Social scientists, ordinary observers, and inhabitants of these stigmatized neighborhoods often refer to them as ghettos. In addition to concentrated poverty, these communities typically have a number of troubling characteristics: high rates of racial segregation, violence, street crime, joblessness, teenage pregnancy, family instability, school dropouts, welfare receipt, and drug abuse. Such neighborhoods emerged decades ago after countless black Americans abandoned rural southern areas for industrializing cities in the wake of Reconstruction's collapse. This is known as the Great Migration, in case you didn't know, okay? So black people left the South and moved towards the North in hopes, just like Moses left Egypt, Pharaonic Egypt, black people felt like they were going to leave the South and find the promised land in the North. But what eventually ended up happening is they became corralled into ghettos, okay? Now everybody's, got some things to say about it, okay? And this is, after the collapse of Reconstruction, because we know there was some promise there directly, after the Civil War, namely that, black people would eventually be honored and respected as human beings and fully integrated into the civil society of the United States. But of course, we know that did not happen, okay? And the South was, ostentatiously and overtly racist, whereas in the North, one could argue, racism still existed, but it wasn't that vitriolic, okay? So anyway, despite the efforts of the civil rights movement and various federal anti-poverty initiatives over the years, ghettos are still a dreadful reality. So then the question becomes, why do they persist? Some charge that the government has yet to create an opportunity structure that would enable those born or raised in ghettos to escape poverty. So that's the blame it on the government kind of argument. Others point to the attitudes and conduct of the ghetto denizens, arguing that the black poor should make better choices and stop blaming the government or racism for hardships they have effectively imposed on themselves. So you see, there's some people who say it's a structural issue. There's some people who say it is a moral issue, okay? And both black and whites make these kind of arguments. So it's not race specific, okay? But anyway, some split the difference, insisting that the public, through government action, should create more opportunity and that the urban poor should make more responsible choices. So then some people, like you said, split the difference. It's not an either or, it's a both and. Anyway, this long-standing and contentious debate has reached an impasse over what best explains the persistence of ghetto conditions, the dysfunctional behavior of the black poor, or structural obstacles to upward mobility, and over what kinds of state interventions, if any, would be the most cost-effective in solving the problem. And this is where the author, inserts himself. However, I urge that we reframe the debate, that we not view it primarily in terms of behavior versus structure, or the strengths and weaknesses of particular anti-poverty measures, but in terms of what justice requires and how we individually and collectively should respond to injustice. Okay? Now, I understand his move here. I get it. But the problem with this kind of move is, how are you going to separate justice from structural obstacles? Or thinking about justice without thinking about structural institutions and systems. Like, how do you do it? How do you separate, these things neatly and discreetly? How do you talk about justice without talking about people's moral behavior or their behavioral propensities? It's a tangled mess, but that's what he proposes to do, okay? He says, many view ghettos and their occupants as a social problem to be fixed. And frankly, that's what people perceive the ghetto as, right? Or Pookies or Shaniquas or whatever. It's a problem, right? And they have a problem and they need to be fixed, right? They're a social problem. And they espouse policy approaches to take the following forms. Describe some noticeable or salient and disconcerting features of ghettos, the prevalence of impoverished single mother families and youth violence. There it is. There are your Pookies right there and your Strags right there, okay? Identify the linchpin that keeps the ghettos in place, joblessness or segregation, and then propose a cost-effective solution that would remove this linchpin, a jobs program or an integration initiative, with the expectation that ghettos will eventually fade away as a result. So there's a perspective of how to solve what's going on in the ghetto, develop some sort of, right, policy or, create some sort of initiative that will somehow, describe what's going on that's wrong, propose a cost-effective solution to it, and then eventually the problem will go away. Now, the author, Tommy Shelby, says, this is a medical model. The primary aim of those working within this framework is to increase the material welfare of people living in ghettos through narrowly targeted and empirically grounded interventions into their lives. Okay? So this perspective, finding out what the issue is, then proposing a solution to it, to him, altogether, anybody who comes up with these kind of propositions are utilizing what he calls a medical model. Okay? Shout out to Afro National. Appreciate that, bro. And I know, this is not going to probably garner too much support, primarily because I'm not being sensationally disrespectful to anybody. But, I think this work is important nonetheless. Okay. Anyway, for some reason I moved too far. Okay, so the author goes on to say, from the standpoint of justice, this approach has serious limitations and pitfalls. So he's critiquing this medical model of trying to solve the problems of the ghetto poor. So he says, just as physicians take basic human anatomy as given when treating patients, policymakers working within the medical model treat the background structure of society as given and focus only on alleviating the burdens of the disadvantaged. When it comes to the ghetto poor, this generally means attempting to integrate them into an existing social system rather than viewing their unwillingness to fully cooperate as a sign that the system itself needs fundamental reform. In short, features of society that could and should be altered often get little scrutiny. This is the problem of status quo bias. So basically the point he's making there is that, okay, the people who propose these solutions, these cost-effective solutions based upon, what they consider to be salient features that are problematic of the ghetto or the people who live there, they assume that everybody else is normal and that the institutions that are extant are normal and they're just and they're working the way that they should. And they look at, the people from the ghetto, their resistance to just fit in or, to do their best to try to, assimilate and integrate. They view them as, somehow problematic. Kind of like possessing a disease without thinking that maybe perhaps the institutions of the society at large were diseased themselves. Maybe there's a problem in the basic structure of the society itself, as opposed to just the people who are perceived as problems, okay? I think that's what he's trying to articulate there. Now, it's telling because I want you to think about this. Just so far, we have two words that have been used in italics, okay? You got medical model and you got status quo bias, okay? So those are important. I think he's going to continuously refer to them throughout the context of this work, okay? Anyway, he says, in addition, the technocratic reasoning of the medical model marginalizes the political agency of those it aims to help. Now, I don't know if you know anything about technocracy or bureaucracy or anything like that, but like when you got a bureaucracy, it's usually organized in a top-down fashion. It's structured hierarchically where you have a group of people who consider themselves to be experts or making decisions that are having an impact, on people who they aim either to service or, quite frankly, to impede by, being able to monitor what they're doing and to be able to circumscribe their actions, okay? So anyway, so I think right here what he's doing is he's criticizing the organization of bureaucracies and technocratic structures and saying that, okay, well, maybe perhaps we need to employ the political agency of people. So instead of, the welfare office just meting out policy or, whatever agency, that gives aid, instead of them just telling, people who are receiving the benefits what they have to do in order to meet the conditions of receiving the aid, perhaps maybe they should enlist their agency or, somehow listen to what they have to say to improve the quality of the service that's being provided. It's kind of like if you're in a business, you should listen to the people who are your consumers. I mean, that's how you maintain good business. Oh, that's how you provide good service, if you are there to actually provide a service as opposed to just, being paternalistic, okay? Shout out to Chris Lewis, man. I appreciate that, bro. I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay. So anyway, the ghetto poor are regarded as passive victims in need of assistance rather than as potential allies in what should be a collective effort to secure justice for all. The everyday, sometimes unusual and often misunderstood choices of those in these disadvantaged communities are viewed, when seen through the lens of the medical model, as at best devoid of moral content or political intent, and at worst pathological. So what he's saying is, if you have a medical model, or if you're using a technocratic lens to view what is happening in terms of the actions and the practices of people in the ghetto, then you're not going to understand their choices very well. you're going to see what they're doing as devoid of moral content or political intent. And at worst, you're going to perceive what's happening there as nothing more than just something that's purely pathological, okay? And then he says, indeed, status quo bias invites us to see dysfunction where perhaps lies resistance to injustice. Call this the problem of downgraded agency, okay? So there you have you got three terms that you've been introduced to, and there'll be more, okay? So the problem of downgraded agency, which is what happens when you have top-down bureaucracies that don't employ the will of the people who they're supposed to serve. Status quo bias, which basically doesn't critique the system, but rather critiques people who aren't, included in the system in a, I guess I would say in a robust way. And then you got the medical model, which is like a top-down kind of model, right? In which you have an expert that's seeing some problem with a people or, an institution, and then they develop some sort of strategy, typically a cost-effective one, in order to try to remedy the problem, like a doctor would try to remedy a disease, okay? So all of these terms, right, are some terms that are more than likely be used over and over again. Then he goes on to say, furthermore, focusing on the problems of the disadvantaged can divert attention from or obscure the numerous ways in which the advantaged unfairly benefit from an unjust social structure. So, again here, he's saying, okay, look, if all we do is look at what's wrong with the poor, then perhaps maybe we're obscuring the ways in which people who are actually advantaged or taking, advantage over people who are disadvantaged, right? And how they benefit from things, like social structures that are not fair. Then he goes on to say, keep in mind that the privileged have a tendency to believe that they have earned all their advantages. Ain't that the damn truth, man? I earned all this. I worked by the sweat of my brow. I earned it all. I'm worthy. I mean, most people who have shit think that way. It's just a fact, bro. It is what it is, all right? So, the privileged have a tendency to believe that they have earned all their advantages while the disadvantages have brought their hardships on themselves. That is a fact. Now, I don't know why this is the way that it is, but this is how the shit usually rolls downhill. Anyway, narrowly focusing on fighting poverty might seem like it's progressive, but it can also serve to quiet the grievances of those most distressed while preserving a stratified social order that will still be marred by serious injustices, illegitimate privileges, and ill-gotten gains. Call this the unjust advantage blind spot problem. Now, he's a philosopher, so he's going to define terms. Philosophers are notorious for being hair splitters when it comes to language. They want to use precise language to articulate and to clearly, define what they consider to be the problems, okay? So, he says, and put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me still, because for some reason, man, my internet seems to be going in and out. I just want to know if you are still there with me, if you can still see and hear what's going on, man. I got like a small, like it's like my internet is teetering on the edge of collapsing or some shit like that. So put a 1 in the chat, man, if you can see or hear anything at all. I just don't know if you can. Okay, cool. All right. So he says, to avoid these limits and pitfalls, I advocate thinking about ghettos through a systemic injustice framework. Okay? Now, I personally think that, a system injustice framework is a good thing to use. I don't think that, continuously making references to personal responsibility and individual morality by themselves apart from justice, language, and conversations is really useful. And then also, I really don't think, quite honest, I mean, you can begin to talk about morality apart from justice, but do understand, these things are related, okay? They're bedmates, so to speak, okay? So he says, when we take up the problem using this model, both government and ordinary citizens are viewed as having a duty to ensure that the social system of cooperation we all participate in is just, okay? So he's saying, look, the government and citizens have a duty to make sure that the systems in the society in which they live are just, okay? The presence of ghettos in American cities is a strong indication that just background conditions do not prevail. Duh. Reflection on ghettos then serves not only to focus our energies on relieving the immense burdens the ghetto poor carry, but also to make us think as fellow citizens about the fairness of the overall social structure we inhabit and maintain. Were the more affluent in society to think about the matter in this way, they would view the ghetto poor not simply as disadvantaged people in need of their help or government intervention, but as fellow citizens with an equal claim on a just social structure. But come on, man, Tommy, bro. Come on, bro. Like, I know you're talking in the abstract. I get what he's doing here, man, and I understand it. But, we just got to be real about this shit, in relation to the abstraction. These people know that these systems and that the conditions of the ghetto poor are not just. They fucking know this, bro. They already know it. No shade on my boy here, man. But anyway, they might then come to recognize that achieving social justice will require not only eschewing their paternalistic and sometimes punitive attitudes towards the black poor, but also relinquishing their unjust advantages. Boy, man, look. Maybe if they took a systemic injustice framework, they might come to see that maybe we should get rid of our paternalism, okay, and relinquish our unjust advantages. And this is the issue right here, man. Like, I look, bro. I recently did a video where I was like reacting to MLK, okay? And in that reaction video, I basically pointed out that there was two phases to MLK's, approach, two phases of his approach to how to deal with the problem that black people were having, okay? The first phase was to immediately, eliminate segregation because it was humiliating and it objectified black folks and took away from their dignity. But after having done that, which he said was the easy part, the next part was to try to usher in a system of redistribution such that, black folks could actually participate in the society just like everybody else is, right? And, MLK basically said, I doubt very seriously that the vast majority of white people are ready for this. Because it would require them to relinquish some of their unjust advantages. Which, by the way, I mean, come on, let's just be frank, man. These people are clinging on to their advantages, man, making excuses for clinging on to their advantages. And then they'll go and they'll say, well, you niggas are in the ghetto if you just worked harder, you just pulled up yourself, if you just worked a little harder, if you just wasn't so fucking ratchet and ghetto, if you wasn't such a fucking pookie, then maybe perhaps you could do it. Now tell me if I'm wrong. I mean, this is coming from black folks. Coming from black people, man. Anyway, he says, I do not object to the use of biological or medical metaphors in social inquiry or public policy, though these can sometimes mislead. The concern is substantive, not semantic, nor do I propose nor do I oppose the medical model per se or the technocratic reasoning that usually accompanies it. It can be an appropriate way to think about and respond to a worrisome social problem when that problem is not a matter of basic justice. And sometimes the medical model is applied to ghettos because advocates of that approach don't believe they are addressing injustices. The task then would be to get proponents to see that matters of basic justice are at issue and to draw their attention to the pitfalls of uncritically invoking that model in the context of systemic injustice. So here what he's basically saying is when you start to talk about systemic injustice, the medical model might not be the best way of approaching the problems and making them tractable because you miss things when you utilize the medical model in the context of dealing with issues related to systemic injustice. That's what he's trying to articulate there, okay? But often those who are concerned to rectify a past or ongoing injustice still opt for the medical model. They think it's a suitable way to solve stubborn social problems, even when these problems are a consequence of injustice. The author says, I aim to show that from the standpoint of political morality, the systemic injustice model is superior, particularly when thinking about and responding to the continuing presence of ghettos in U.S. cities. Okay? Now, how long have I been doing this, man? I've been doing this I'm going to go for an hour at the most, man. So I've only done 5 pages. This thing, I really would like to get through the entire introduction, but I don't know if I can do it without being able to, because it's, yeah, I'm going to go to like page 8. That's, or maybe, 9 or 10. That's the most I'm going to try to do, bro, because I'm not, yeah. I'm not trying to do this all in one night, okay? Anyway, it says the next section is called social facts and moral principles, okay? When social justice questions are raised, there is a common tendency to treat the answers as obvious or to regard disagreements about the answers as products of irresolvable ideological differences. That's true, right? When you start to talk about justice, people, act as if they got the answers, or the answers are like just so obvious, right? Or if there are disagreements, then, well, we just got to agree to disagree, okay? So anyway, he goes on to say, indeed, some are skeptical of the very idea of social justice. Alternatively, some, though not in principle opposed to the discourse of justice, are content to rest their response to ghetto poverty almost entirely on empirical analysis of the social facts. Their assumption is that disagreements over empirical claims are more manageable than messy disputes over what justice requires. Thinking carefully through complex issues of political morality is thus taken to be unnecessary, unfruitful, or pointless, at best a mere academic exercise. There is, of course, and there are a lot of dudes in this space who think like that, bro. I'm just keeping it a buck. I've heard Negroes here say shit. This is unproductive. Why are you talking about this? And get angry to the point like where they like ready to bang on men in the manosphere about shit like this. Seriously, bro. I swear to God. Anyway, so basically they say, well, if you can't agree on ideals, you can at least work your way through the mess of empirical claims. Because, it's easier to do, right? But anyway, he goes on to say, there is, of course, profound disagreement among philosophers and citizens alike about what justice requires. The practical problems of ghettos cannot wait for consensus to form on such controversial questions. Still, questions of justice should not be avoided, downplayed, or ignored, as many of the sharp political clashes over ghetto poverty turn. I will show on disagreements over values, not facts. Say it again. This is a fact. I believe this to be true. Because, and he says, let me repeat this line again. He says, questions of justice should not be avoided, downplayed, or ignored, as many of the sharp political clashes over ghetto poverty turn over disagreements about values, not facts. And that's the truth. I believe that to be true. So he says justice questions should therefore be a focal point of public policy, political activism, and civic discourse concerning the future of our cities and their most disadvantaged inhabitants. To that end, I have three main objectives. And when we get through these three objectives, I'm going to shut it down. Okay? First objective. He says, I specify what it is about the social structure of the United States that justifies the claim that ghettos are a product and a reliable sign of systemic injustice. He says, here I draw on influential contemporary writings in the liberal tradition that identify standards for judging the extent to which societies realize justice. And, you know, we can go to the footnotes, but right now I just don't want to do that. While these philosophical studies tackle basic liberties, distributive justice, and to some extent gender equality, research in this area is much less developed on race and on the confounding race-class nexus. He says, I develop insights from liberal, feminist, and black radical thought to arrive at a systematic account of social injustices along the dimensions of race, gender, and class. So that's what first. What is it about the social structure of the U.S. that justifies that the existence of ghettos are a sign of systemic injustice? And he borrows from a whole host of literature that exists in the academy, in, you know, the prevailing wisdom about, you know, the ghettos are an indication, a sign of a symptom of social injustice, okay? So that's the first thing. Second, though many accept the state, or that the state is obligated to ensure a just social structure, fewer appreciate the moral limits on what types of policies may be implemented while unjust conditions prevail. What the hell does he mean here? There are moral constraints both on how the state may treat those severely disadvantaged by justice and on what means it may deploy to improve their circumstances. For example, if joblessness is a cause of urban poverty, as many contend, can the government legitimately require work as a condition of subsistence support even when the employment opportunity structure is deeply unfair? I think the answer is no, and aim to establish this. Thus, a second objective is to identify the normative limits on state anti-poverty interventions. And let me be quite frank here, man. I know what the fuck he's doing here. He's talking about this workfare shit, okay? That's what he's talking about right here. I guarantee it, bro. Because that's the only situation in which groups of persons have been, you know, told that if you're going to receive the aid, then you got to work. So he's got to be talking about workfare. And there's nothing else he could be talking about here, okay? Or maybe he could, but I doubt so, okay? So but it basically is saying, look, if the system is unjust, if the system by which people are employed is unjust, then how can you throw it around and say, well, in order for you to receive assistance, then, you know, you have to work towards being employed. It's like you're putting motherfuckers in a catch-22. You're having people on a wild goose chase. Okay? Anyway, third, I explained that the unjustly disadvantaged are morally required and permitted. He explained what the unjustly disadvantaged are morally required and permitted to do in response to the unjust conditions that circumscribe their lives. Okay? So there's the third thing, right? Again, this is just making reference to his objectives. Okay? Justice questions about the ghetto and its most disadvantaged inhabitants, right? So third, he says, again, what are the unjustly disadvantaged morally required and permitted to do? What duties do poor people have? What duties and moral proscriptions or prescriptions apply to ghetto people, to pookies and strags, if you want to use the nigger language we use, which is is ghetto language if you ask me. You got niggas critiquing the ghetto, but using ghetto ebonics and language and shit to articulate it. Then they act like they're above it though. But you know, hey, let me stop. Anyway, some of the conduct poor urban blacks engage in is harmful to others. There you got your pookies. Self-destructive or incompatible with self-respect. Right? So that's A. Call that condition A. Some of the conduct poor blacks engage in is harmful to others, self-destructive, and incompatible with self-respect. On the other hand, B, some of their actions are best seen as a moral response to injustice. That is, as a form of resistance or dissent. So I also explain what would constitute a responsible and dignified response on the part of the ghetto poor to their social conditions. So in other words, what can black people in the ghetto respectfully do in order to resist against their oppression? Okay? This aspect of the book is a case study in the politics or the political ethics of the oppressed. There is abundant philosophical work explaining what a social system must be like if it is to be fully just. There is also a long tradition of writing on civil disobedience as a response to injustice. However, we have little work, comparatively speaking, that defines the duties of individuals living under unjust conditions or explains the virtues of political resistance. And the work that does exist often focuses on the affluent or bystanders rather than the oppressed. So, okay. Some scholars and commentators who are sympathetic to the plight of the downtrodden do emphasize the agency of the oppressed, but only when the oppressed exhibit attitudes or take actions generally regarded as praiseworthy. For example, when they show resilience under hardship, defy their oppressors, or overcome tremendous obstacles. But not all responses to oppression are justified or virtuous. Okay. So he's basically saying what actions are limited within the scope of range of resistance against systematic injustice for ghetto denizens. We must admit that the oppressed sometimes respond in ways that are wrong or blameworthy. Like, for example, maybe burning down a Quick Trip. I mean, you have to ask the question, is it wrong? Turning over cop cars? Is it wrong? Saying fuck the police? Is it wrong? Something to think about, right? So anyway, he says, we must admit that the oppressed sometimes respond in ways that are wrong. There can be no ethics of the oppressed, and thus no point in emphasizing the agency of the oppressed if those who are unjustly disadvantaged can do no wrong. And this is where he's qualifying the shit out of himself here, man. He's qualifying himself, and I know why he's doing it. He's trying to cover his ass because he's about to light into the ass of some people in the hood, man. He's about to get into some shit about what the fuck niggas in the hood is doing is fucked up. So he wants to qualify his statements and say, hey, we can't talk about the agency of the oppressed if we can't also criticize them when they're fucking up and doing things that are morally blameworthy? We got to be able to light into their ass. In essence, we got to be able to talk about single moms and Pookies. You got to be able to say something bad about Ray Ray and Pookie and Shaniqua and, Glorilla, who's fuck nigga free. We got to be able to say something about it. Oh, shit, bro. This is funny to me, but I mean, he's a smart dude. Okay, anyway. In explaining the content and contours of the relevant principles and values, I therefore seek to avoid not only the tendency to view the ghetto poor as inert, but also the tendencies to rush to blame them and to romantically celebrate them. So he doesn't want to avoid what he does. He said, I seek to avoid not only viewing the ghetto poor as like everything is happening to them and they have no agency. They got some agency, okay? And I don't want to either, blame them fully or romantically celebrate them. I want to look at what the fuck is going on there accurately and make, a correct kind of assessment about the moral character of the people there. And to explain what I consider to be morally problematic about the people there. But one of the things that he's going to do is, I guarantee it, bro, the reason he's doing this shit is because he's going to perform some of the same kind of critiques as Kenneth Clark did in his text, which eventually led to the development and the construction of the Moynihan Report and this whole concept of the tangle of pathology. So he's going to begin to talk about black pathology, but not necessarily black pathology, but black immorality in the context of the ghetto. Because one of the things, I guarantee you what he's going to end up saying is that just because you're poor and you're subjected to injustice, it doesn't give you the right to behave immorally. I think that's what he's going to end up saying. Anyway, some readers may feel that as a matter of solidarity, the black intelligentsia, people like himself, should affirm the humanity of black urban poor, defend them against false and insulting charges, and, most relevant, avoid publicly criticizing the way they respond to their oppression. They are, after all, simply trying to survive under trying circumstances not of their making. However, my articulation of an ethics of the oppressed is perfectly consistent with what might be called the stand and fight tradition in black political thought. The stand and fight. So in black political thought, there's a stand your ground tradition. Fuck no, bro. I don't know why I'm finding this shit amusing, but I am. I'm sorry, man. Anyway, the shit I get off on, man, is I'm purely nerdy. But anyway, this tradition counsels against suffering in silence and insists on fighting openly and assertively in the press, in the legislative halls, in the courts, and in the streets, and not only quietly behind the scenes. For instance, Harriet Jacobs and Frederick Douglass, though born and raised under slavery, not only praised the solidarity and defiance of slaves, but openly expressed contempt for slaves who were treacherous. Fuck no, bro. Hey, not only praised the solidarity and defiance of slaves, but openly expressed contempt for slaves who were treacherous, servile, or apologists for slavery. You mean there actually was some daffies, some dancing daffies? Diggity daffies? Anyway, Black abolitionists like David Walker and Maria Stewart, though themselves never enslaved, maintain the same uncompromising moral stance. Okay, so talking about Frederick Douglass, Harriet Jacobs, okay? Then he goes on to talk about David Walker and Maria Stewart, right? They weren't enslaved, but they maintained the same uncompromising moral stance. Walker insisted that slaves exhibit solidarity. Now, if you consider solidarity under the guise or the conditions of oppression to be Pan-Africanism, well then fuck it. It is what it is. What else you supposed to do? Save yourself, black man? That's what the fuck you supposed to do? When you got an entire system, like say for example, you a slave. What the fuck does SYSBM mean in the conditions of slavery? What the fuck does it mean then? Suck master's dick? What the fuck, man? Huh? I'm just asking the question because something that goes out to Ray ass. Since you want to be contrary, be an asshole tonight. What does it mean? So Walker says basically, the man who would not fight under our Lord and Master Jesus Christ in the glorious and heavenly cause of freedom and of God, to be delivered from the most wretched, abject, and servile slavery that ever a people was afflicted with since the foundations of the world to the present day, ought to be kept with all of his children or family in slavery or in chains to be butchered by his cruel enemies. In other words, if you don't stand and fight, you deserve it. You deserve to be a slave if you don't resist against it. You deserve to be subjected to dehumanization if you don't resist against it. And so the author says, I have no greater conviction than the imperative to keep faith with this majestic and honorable tradition, which is the stand and fight tradition. I mean, hey, it is what it is. I don't have a problem with stepping on nobody's toes. All I ask for you to do is to respond with a cogent argument. If you're gonna, basically save yourself in the context of a system that's bearing down on you with fucking the weight of a freight train, what does saving yourself actually mean? Does it mean tap dancing? What the fuck do you mean? What do you actually mean, bro? I'm just asking. And I ain't trying to say nothing in particular about individuals, but I'm just saying, what do you mean? What do we mean? Anyway, he says, while this book engages with and draws on research into social sciences, legal studies, urban studies, and African American studies, it is primarily a work of political theory and social philosophy. As a philosopher writing about ghetto poverty, my role is not to identify the causes of ghettos, nor is it to propose policy prescriptions. So let's get that shit out of the way right then and there. Let me repeat this. This is what the author says. Look, I'm engaging in drawing on research into social sciences. I'm going to legal studies. I'm going to urban studies. I'm even going to African American studies. But what I'm doing here is political theory and social philosophy. I'm writing about ghetto poverty, but I'm not trying to identify the cause empirically of ghettos. I'm not here to propose policy prescriptions, primarily. Instead, I think systematically through the thorny conceptual and normative questions to which reflection on ghettos gives rise. Though this is a work in practical philosophy, one won't find herein concrete marching orders for activists and organizations seeking to improve the conditions of the ghetto poor. One will find, however, a detailed defense of the values and principles that I believe should and sometimes do guide grassroots reform efforts and policy prescriptions. And look, this is a tactic that philosophers often make going way back to Aristotle. Like Aristotle will come and say some shit like this. Look, this is something, like Aristotle will say, look, if you want me to tell you how to be virtuous and to give you a formula to figure it out, then you're in the wrong place. I can't give you a formula on how to be virtuous, but what I can do is give you a general rule of thumb on how to aim and to reach for it. But that's like saying to, an artist, like say for example, what do I exactly need to do in order to be successful in the music industry? I can't tell you exactly what to fucking do. Or in any industry, on YouTube, anything. People can give you guidelines on, what to do, how to go about in a general way doing certain things, but nobody can tell you distinctly exactly what to do in order to be successful. This is not math. It's not an exact science, although it's political science to a certain extent, but it's not like mathematics where you get the exact answers. Like, how do I get water? Well, I'll take, 2 hydrogen atoms and mix them together with 1 oxygen atom, and then we get the molecular composition of water. The shit doesn't work like that. Okay, that's what he's saying, okay? Anyway, social scientists tend not to make or even to imply value judgments about the subjects they study. In their role as empirical researchers, they do not presume to tell the poor or anyone else how they ought to live or what they should value. Though perhaps personally moved by a desire to reduce poverty or even by egalitarian concerns, in their vocation as scientists, many take themselves to be doing nothing more than providing empirical analysis of ghetto poverty. There are, of course, some social scientists, particularly those making policy recommendations, who don't hesitate to make value claims or to rely on what they take to be widely held and sound moral judgments. But even here, the inferential links between analytical claims, empirical conclusions, moral assumptions, and policy prescriptions are often not explicitly or carefully articulated. Social scientific studies of a social problem lead directly to specific proposals for how to fix it. Often missing is sufficient critical reflection on values that should guide such proposals. In particular, the basic justice considerations that should structure public policy. With notable exceptions, policy discussions of ghetto poverty don't explicitly state, let alone defend, the values upon which they rest. Dark Ghettos addresses this normative gap. Okay, so he says we're going to talk about values. I'm not going to shy away from talking about it. What are the values, say, for example, of Pookie? What are the values of Shaquina? And what they're reaching for at any particular point in time, okay? And what are the values of policymakers? Some readers may become impatient with the arguments to come, perhaps insisting that the only thing that matters is what would solve this urgent problem, which is what a lot of Negroes in this space do. What's the solution? Just give me the solution now. Like they got one right now. Like they have all the answers right now. Like they ready to roll. Like they have all of it figured out. They just got like this book and shit on how to win the race game. Nigga, if you got that much motherfucking game, nigga, why ain't you gave it to everybody thus far? What you sitting on it for? What you sitting on it for then? Why is it in your hands and you ain't gave it up if you got all the answers, Sway? I hear you, man. Hey, look. Jim Master says it's just about distancing yourself from black women, which is it's black divesting is what it is, right? Black male divesting. It's black male divesting, right? Let's call this shit what it is. And look, I don't have a problem with it, man. If you like it, I love it, bro. I'm not here to right now have a deep-seated conversation about SYSBM or IBMO or anything else. You know? But hey, one has to ask the question, is this really dealing with the deep-seated problems that we have in the black so-called community? Huh? Is it really getting to the root of the shit? Anyway, some readers, he says, may become impatient with the things I have to say, right? Some people are going to say, just tell us what's going to solve the problem. But he says there are related, logically prior questions that also matter. For instance, it matters enormously how we think about the problem. How do we conceptualize it? While all agree to certain aspects of life in ghettos are troubling, what is it about ghetto poverty that calls for a solution? And what constitutes fixing the problem? That is, what standards are appropriate for judging progress or failure? Finally, even if we identify a set of actions that will bring about a desirable outcome, for example, a reduction in black poverty, we need to know whether these actions are justifiable to all concerned. There are questions of political morality that cannot be elided or passed over through pragmatism, no matter how urgently solutions are needed. I said I'd go to 8. Now maybe I might go a little past it. I just want to get past this shit here, man. Contemporary debate in the academy and beyond centers on what caused ghetto conditions to arise and what best explains the persistence of these disadvantaged neighborhoods. Many point to racism and discrimination or to income and wealth inequities. And I discuss these factors. But I also consider 7 other possible explanatory factors. Jesus, Louises, he said, look. So he said, this is important here. I think this, he said, so look, many people point to racism and discrimination or to income and wealth inequities. He says, yeah, I discussed those, but I consider 7 other possible explanatory factors for the nagging persistence of ghetto conditions and disadvantage. Residential segregation, cultural configuration. Why you gotta say it like that, Tommy, dog? Come on, bro. Reproductive choices, single mother families, joblessness, crime, and mass incarceration. Why are the ghettos the way that they are? Residential segregation, cultural configurations, reproductive choices, single mother families, joblessness, crime, and mass incarceration. The claim that these are central factors in explaining ghetto poverty is widely endorsed and has empirical support. But it is not my task to sort out which of these factors is most important for explaining ghetto conditions. I've organized this book as a set of philosophical reflections on these possible factors. The argument is structured in this way in part to provide a better analytical and normative grip on ghetto poverty by keeping questions of justice always in view. I will consider questions like these. Should government attempt to foster integrated neighborhoods in order to reduce inequality? If there are cultural patterns in poor black communities that would inhibit upward mobility, what, if anything, should be done about this? Why am I sounding more like Dave Chappelle? What responsibility does the public have to support vulnerable families in ghetto communities? What is the proper role of government in creating employment opportunities for jobless inner city residents? What are the obligations of government to curb crime? And what limits should there be on crime control measures that affect the unfairly disadvantaged? Some interesting questions. And I'm pretty sure people from different political orientations will answer the questions differently. Anyway, securing and maintaining justice is not only an obligation of state officials or a collective responsibility of the public. Justice also imposes duties on individuals, including disadvantaged citizens. These demands are valid even when government isn't doing all it should to bring about just conditions. So here's his responsibility and culpability for poor people. You see it right here. Justice imposes duties on individuals, including disadvantaged citizens. So it's not just, hey, I'm making excuses for the poor. But to some extent he will, but then he's also saying there's also demands of morality and justice, duties, if you will, that require you to do something to either improve your condition or at least not to make it worse. At least a duty not to make things even more terrible than what they are. Taking such moral requirements seriously leads to questions such as these. Should the ghetto poor welcome and seize opportunity for residential integration? Should they choose mainstream norms over deviant cultural norms when their ambitions have been unfairly thwarted? Do they have a duty to work in legitimate jobs, even when these are menial and low paying? What responsibilities do poor urban parents have to form and maintain well-functioning families despite socioeconomic hardship? Should the black poor respect and comply with the law, even when civic equality isn't fully realized? To the extent that lack of freedom, material deprivation, social stigma, and limited life prospects are the result of factors outside the control of individuals, no reasonable person could think that the plight of the ghetto poor is their own fault or that they don't merit assistance from their government or fellow citizens. If those born and raised in ghettos remain disadvantaged only because of racial discrimination, inadequate schools, unjust barriers that prevent them from leaving their impoverished and often violent communities, or some other circumstance not of their choosing, they cannot be blamed and are entitled to public interventions on their behalf. However, when many look at America's ghettos and at the poor black people who reside in them, they don't see injustices, or only injustices. They see immorality, irresponsibility, imprudence. There's the strag talk, and there's the pookie talk right there. They believe that the attitudes and conduct of the ghetto poor contribute to and even worsen their plight. After all, some of the factors that social scientists point to when explaining the persistence of ghettos residential configurations, cultural dynamics, reproductive patterns and family structure, unemployment rates, crime and incarceration rates are not wholly outside of the control of poor black people. These factors call out for critical reflection on structure and agency. We have to consider institutional constraint and individual choice. So he's saying it right here. Look, there's some things that black people do have control over. Although my decision to focus on the 7 factors turned on their empirical plausibility as explanatory factors, their relevance for thinking about justice and injustice, and the questions they raise about the responsibilities of the ghetto poor, it is the 3rd dimension that makes the problem of ghettos so challenging and controversial. Many people, including some black people, believe the ghetto poor are responsible for perpetuating their own poverty. And for this reason, they don't view ghettos as unjust or a sign of injustice. Sure enough, bro. I gotta give him a bomb for that. I gotta give a bomb for that one. Many black people believe the ghetto poor are responsible for perpetuating their own poverty. And for this reason, they don't view ghettos as unjust or as a sign of injustice. Fuck them niggas there. Fuck them. You tell me I'm lying. If I'm lying, I'm dying. I may as well croak over right now. Because I done heard so many Negroes say, fuck these niggas. But the ghetto poor often have good reason to think and act as they do. This becomes clear once we view ghettos from the standpoint of justice and take it seriously that their disadvantaged denizens are responding as rational and moral agents to sound reasons as they live their difficult and often tragic lives. Man, do I want to get into liberalism and this shit right here, right now? How long is it, bro? No, I can't do that. It's too, well, it ain't that long, but, you know, I know y'all got a short attention span, man. But, okay, you know, I've been reading for an hour and 30 minutes, so I may as well just get the rest of this shit out of here and be done with it, okay? Liberalism and non-ideal theory. So if I do that, y'all, okay, I'm going to give y'all the choice. If you want me to take a break here and say fuck it and pick it up the next time, I'll say fuck it and pick it up here on the next time. Number 1, do it later. 0, do it right now. Whatever choice y'all come up with is good for me. Number 1, wait for later. Letter 0 or the 0, do it later. Which one y'all want, man? Dope or dog food? You tell me. So do it right now, is what you're saying. You want me to get rid of this bitch right now? Okay, okay. Okay, I'm gonna keep pushing in. I'm gonna keep pushing. But I gotta, hey man, I need to take a sip of some sarsaparilla real quick. You know what I'm saying? And hey, show some support to the fucking Green Gorilla channel, man, please. God damn. Hold on, let me go on a commercial break, man. I'm gonna go on a quick commercial break. I'll be right back. I'm gonna wet my palate, man, with a sip of sarsaparilla real fast, man. Be right back. All right, man, we back. I'm GG, man. I had to take a little sip of some sarsaparilla real fast, man. Some soda or something before I continued this. Unfortunately, man, you know, my internet, man, it goes in and out for some reason. I don't know why, man. I got like the highest amount of internet service you can get, like a gig and a half, and this shit still don't act right. Man. But anyway, let me capture the screen, bro, and get back on this, man, so we can get through with this, man. All right. So liberalism and non-ideal theory. Now, we've been having conversations about liberalism and non-ideal theory. I don't know necessarily non-ideal theory is something we've talked about, but I know we've been talking about liberalism, okay? Because liberalism is a certain philosophical position about the human person and their relationship to other persons and to the institutions, you know, their relationship to the institutions of society. Whether the institutions be governmental, you know, or you know, market-based or whatever the case may be, okay? So anyway, how should we think about and respond to the persistence of ghettos in the post-civil rights era? As a philosophical answer to that question, this book develops a liberal egalitarian theory of black urban poverty. Okay? Liberal egalitarian theory of black urban poverty. I can tell you right now, Tommy Shelby, he's a fucking Rawlsian, okay? I don't know, he's a Rawlsian. He's a Rawlsian. By liberals or liberalism, I don't mean Americans' political self-descriptions or party affiliations. Nor am I referring to neoliberalism, an ideology that, for example, promotes the use of market rationality and business principles in all social institutions, prefers firms and private organizations rather than state agencies to carry out public functions, and views citizens primarily as economic agents, investors, entrepreneurs, workers, and consumers. Instead, I have in mind a political morality defined by a set of normative principles, a tradition developed by thinkers such as Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, and John Rawls. Okay, so yeah, there's a difference, okay? I think they blend into each other to a certain degree, so I don't think that there's this hard and fast distinction between liberals in the philosophical tradition, right, that he's mentioning here, or from neoliberalism. I don't think that there's this hard and fast distinction deep down anyway, but you know, okay, whatever. He says liberal political morality regards the individual rather than the family unit, social group, or nation as the primary unit of moral concern, and insists that each individual should be treated with equal respect by governing bodies. It denies that an individual's basic interest in self-governance can be legitimately sacrificed to promote the welfare of others. It opposes social hierarchies based on circumstances of birth, race, sex, caste, family background, or feudal rank, or on religious conviction and piety. Committed to democratic principles, it regards all members of society as equals, with the same claim to participate in public affairs. The kind of liberalism defended here takes seriously not only individual liberty and civic equality, but also substantive economic fairness, and so is better described as liberal egalitarianism to distinguish it from other variants in the broader liberal tradition. In this way, there are liberals, as defined by their self-description, Democratic Party membership, or confidence in markets and privatization who are not liberals in my sense, because they are not liberal egalitarians. And there are liberals in my sense who reject the label liberal altogether, although they endorse the principles of liberal political morality. Also, the liberalism I defend is not grounded in utilitarianism or welfare economics. I don't think the promotion of happiness or preference satisfaction is the heart of morality. I embrace and defend a non-consequentialist moral outlook, which draws on Kantian and contractualist ideals, and so reject the notion or the idea that the practical consequences of our actions are all that matters morally, which is not to deny that consequences are morally significant. Okay, so look, he's a liberal Kantian. Now, Kant. I would go deeper and explain this shit. Maybe if you ask me and I'm willing to talk about it after this shit is over, I can do it. But right now, I just kind of want to read through this and get through it. So anyway, he's a non-consequentialist, meaning the consequences when you talk about non-consequentialism, it often, to me, brings up the debate between deontology and utilitarianism. That I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, this non-consequentialism extends to political morality, even to principles of justice. For instance, individuals within a polity have a basic interest in being treated with equal concern and respect by the basic institutions of their society, even if, upon reflection, they don't value such treatment. The word liberal may put some off who believe that liberal philosophy has little or nothing to offer those who care deeply about racial injustices or the plight of black people in the U.S. Some are convinced that liberalism and the Enlightenment worldview with which it is associated is itself an instrument of racial domination, a handmaiden of white supremacy. This judgment, widely held among black radicals, is mistaken, as I aim to show. The social and political philosophy that I defend is a version of what Michael Dawson has called black radical egalitarianism, and what Charles Mills has recently dubbed black radical liberalism. Black radical liberalism is a normative theory of state power, draws heavily from liberal egalitarian thought, but in its broader social philosophy, which is not solely concerned with official state action, it embraces insights from black nationalism, feminism, and Marxism. I don't offer a comprehensive account of the principles of a society must satisfy to be fully just. That would be a project in ideal theory, and others have given liberal egalitarian theory detailed and, I believe, convincing defense. I think he's referring to Rawls here. In noting this, I am not suggesting that the enterprise is searching for a more profound and precise understanding of what social justice requires is worthless or without practical import. It is just that I believe we can rely on the wisdom and insights thus far attained to develop non-ideal theory, which specifies and justifies the principles that should guide our responses to injustices. Because some doubt the value of ideal theory altogether, and the relationship between ideal and non-ideal theorizing is hotly contested and often misunderstood, so some preliminary remarks are in order. Ideal theory and non-ideal theory are complementary components of an endeavor to devise a systematic account of social justice. In fact, non-ideal theory logically depends on ideal theory, and the aims of non-ideal theory give ideal theory its practical significance. For example, Rawls's famous principles of justice, equal liberty, fair equality of opportunity, and the difference principle are the product of ideal theorizing and have two main functions: to serve as practical goals to work toward and as normative standards for judging the overall justice of particular social arrangements. Ideal theory provides evaluative standards for judging when a social order is seriously unjust and an objective to strive for in our resistance to oppression. Injustices are conceptualized as deviations from the ideal principles of justice, in much the same way that fallacious reasoning is conceived as a deviation from the rules of logical inference. An injustice is a failure on the part of individuals, institutions, or social arrangements to satisfy what the principles of justice demand. Thus, charges of injustice presuppose ideals of justice, which particular individuals, institutions, or whole societies can and often do depart from. Such deviations can be small or great, minor or serious, and depending on the size and nature of the gap between ideals and practice, and also on whether these deviations are avoidable or blameworthy, different remedies will be required. Like, look, bro, I think this is all, this is to address people complaining that, fuck Rawlsian theory, like this shit is impractical, it's just highly theoretical. Why not have a more practical and a more, deliberative kind of process to determine the rules of interaction between citizens and the justice or the injustice that obtains with institutions and so on. Look, I'm not here to. That's a debate, man, that you would have to, I ain't gonna say you gotta be a fucking PhD to understand it, but bro, I'm not even trying to get into all that right now. I just will say this, if it was a fifth, we'd all be drunk. I'm just fucking around, man. I shouldn't say that shit. Anyway, non-ideal theory includes 4 types of principles. Principles of reform and revolution are standards that should guide efforts to transform an unjust institutional arrangement into a more just one. Okay? Principles of rectification should guide attempts to remedy or make amends for the injuries and losses victims have suffered as a result of ongoing or past injustice. Principles of crime control should guide the policies a society relies on when attempting to minimize and deter individual non-compliance with what justice requires. Political ethics are the principles and values that should guide individuals as they respond to social injustices and that serve as the basis for criticizing the failure of individuals to promote just circumstances and to avoid complicity with justice. Together, the principles of reform and revolution and the principles of rectification jointly constitute a theory of corrective justice. Okay. Type 1 principles have to do with altering the basic structure of a society so that it better approximates a fully just society. Type 2 principles address the need to lift or lighten the burdens on those disadvantaged because of injustice or to make amends to those harmed by injustice. So type 1, we got to alter the basic structure of society. Type 2, lift or lighten the burdens of those people who are actually disadvantaged because of injustice and make amends. Okay? Type 1 principles are forward-looking, oriented towards establishing a more just society. Type 2 principles are backward-looking, correcting for previous injustices that have already occurred. Paying moral debts is what he says, right? So, everybody knows that there's forward-looking and backward-looking approaches to justice, okay? Even when you talk about punishment, you got forward and backward-looking approaches, right? A forward-looking approach is deterrence. Like if I have a stiff death penalty, it will deter somebody from committing a crime, right? But then there's retribution, which is a backward-looking concept of punishment in which, you got to make the person pay for the wrong that he did, and you do so through retribution, okay? I'm just trying to explain backward and forward looking to you so you got that, okay? Anyway, man, type 1, forward-looking principles that are orientated towards establishing a just society. Type 2 principles are backward-looking, which are oriented towards repairing injury and settling unpaid moral debts. Theorizing about corrective justice is thus more than laying down principles for compensating the victims of past injustice or reducing their disadvantages. It also includes the philosophical arm of collective efforts to establish a society regulated by a mutual commitment to justice. Reformers and revolutionaries should be aiming to create a society in which the principles of justice are fully realized in its institutions and in which citizens comply with institutional rules because these are in accord with their shared conception of justice. It is in this way that ideal theory serves as a guide for non-ideal theory. And shout out to Hakeem. So he's saying that type 1 and type 2 principles, forward and backward looking principles, need to be working in conjunction with one another in order to, bring about justice more so, rather than like even just thinking about something like reparations. That's just backward looking. But we also need to be thinking about how we can establish a more just society and how to make the institutions match up more closely or approximate more closely what justice demands. He then goes on to say we cannot develop a philosophically adequate theory of how to respond to social injustice without first knowing what makes a social scheme unjust. In the case of gross injustices, such as slavery or genocide, we may be able to judge confidently that a social arrangement is unjust simply by observing it or having it described to us, relying exclusively on our theoretic moral convictions. We don't need a theory for that. But with less manifest injustices, or when our political values seem to conflict, or when we're uncertain about what justice requires, or when there is great but honest disagreement about whether a practice is unjust, in the absence of a more systematic conception of justice, we can't know which aspects of a society should be altered. Without a coherent set of principles that enables us to identify the unjust features of a social system, we could not be confident as to what direction social change should take. So basically saying that, having a philosophy about what a social just scheme is necessary, especially if disagreements, ensue, okay? Or like there's an epistemic problem of some kind, like we're not certain about what to do or what justice requires in a specific set of instances, okay? The ideas can help us. Those living within a just and stable society presumably would, for the most part, comply with and respect the law. Okay? Yet, even in a reasonably just polity, we can expect some individuals to break the law and violate the rights of others. Type 3 principles are designed to deal with these features or failures of individual compliance. When these principles are realized, they assure the law-abiding that others won't be allowed to take advantage of the goodwill and respect for justice, of their goodwill and respect for justice. The normative theory of punishment falls within this domain. But within non-ideal theory, there is also the question of how a society should respond to lawbreaking when the society itself is seriously unjust. So we know that it's pretty easy to know what to do about lawbreaking when the rules are just and when the structures and the systems are just. But what do you do about lawbreaking when society itself is seriously unjust? How do you handle it, okay? Any attempt to come to terms with the condition of the ghetto poor must address this issue. Okay? Within a just society, individual citizens have various civic duties. For instance, they should do their part to uphold and maintain the social arrangements from which they benefit. This includes obeying the law, holding public officials accountable, paying their taxes, reporting crimes, serving on juries, and so on. But when a society is unjust, individuals must decide how they should respond to this collective failing. A theory of political ethics explains and justifies the values that should figure in such deliberations. For instance, we each have a duty to help establish just institutions where they fail to exist and to improve the well-being of the oppressed when we can. So, the last paragraph in this section is the ghetto poor are often viewed as either helpless victims of injustice or a menace to society. Their political acts of defiance are therefore generally regarded as posturing, treated as misguided, ignored altogether, or actively repressed. Yet, some actions of the ghetto poor that are interpreted as deviant or pathological should instead be understood as moral responses to injustice. By looking at their conduct this way, we gain insight into the political ethics of the unjustly disadvantaged and can better evaluate when these responses are reasonable and permissible or blameworthy and self-defeating. So, a new theory of ghettos. And this is the last 3 paragraphs. This book offers a normative, non-ideal theory of ghettos that emphasizes basic concerns of justice and highlights the political ethics of the oppressed. It is a liberal egalitarian theory that takes economic fairness as seriously as it does individual liberty and formal equality. While my focus is on the plight of Black people in the U.S., this is not a book about race alone. I'm just as concerned about gender, class, and place. I discuss social structure and individual responsibility, avoiding the all too common tendency to emphasize one or the other. And I do so without devaluing the political agency of the ghetto poor. To that end, I advance a political morality of dissent appropriate to the ghetto context. Systematic attempts to explain what justice requires are as old as Plato's Republic. Reflecting on modes of injustice, like the conditions ghetto poverty represents, can help us better understand the meaning and urgency of this perennial philosophical question. Throughout Dark Ghettos moves back and forth between the sometimes esoteric, lofty, and abstract concerns of philosophy and the familiar grim and concrete realities of the contemporary urban landscape. I offer the resulting theory in the firm belief that careful philosophical reflection can assist in moving the public debate over Black urban poverty in a more productive direction, pointing the way towards solutions that are fair to all concerned and that treat the truly disadvantaged among us with the respect they deserve. So that's for the most part the introduction, okay? Again, the next section, and like I said, I'm not going to read this back to back to back to back to back day after day. It'll be too much for me, okay? And you know, it'll just be too taxing on me. But anyway, we did the introduction, Rethinking the Problem of the Ghetto. We read that. So the next section is, I'll probably end up reading part of Liberty, Equality, and Fraternity, probably part of Injustice in part 1. And this book again is called Dark Ghettos, Injustice, Dissent, and Reform.